Hi, everyone. I am now live, but had some tech issues. It wouldn't work on the original link. So hopefully, those of you who are waiting on the other link, I've left you a message and you will find me over here. So Happy New Year. For some of you, it might be 2024 already if I've got anybody here from Australia or New Zealand or that part of the world. But for the rest of us, we've got a few hours to go yet. And I get very reflective actually at this time of year. And something that I do, I think I've spoken about this maybe on the podcast, and I've been doing it for about 5 years now, is every New Year's Day, I record a video to myself. And it's about 20 minutes of me just talking to myself and reflecting on the previous year. I talk about what I've been doing that year, and I think about the year ahead and what I might hope for. And then every year I get to watch last year's video. So tomorrow on New Year's Day, I get to watch the video I recorded New Year's Day at the beginning of this year. And I never remember what I said. So it's often a bit of a surprise. So I will be doing that tomorrow. So it looks like some of you have found me. Thank you. Hi. I'm not sure what will happen to the other link now. I don't know if it's still showing. So apologies for that. But so hi, Andy. Good to see you. 2 o'clock for you. That does sound very convenient. It's 5 o'clock here. And I just thought in the UK, for most people, if you're going to do something for New Year's, your New Year's plans haven't started yet. One of the questions I had pre-submitted actually was how to get one of my mugs. These I ordered for me and Steph off of Vistaprint, and we do keep meaning to sort out a merch store, but we haven't got round to that for the podcast yet. But hello, Andy, and hi, Sarah. Good to see you. I know there were a couple of questions that had come up on the other live. So I can see the chat on the other live. Unfortunately, I just can't get to them. So if you are watching this on a replay, I will put like a timestamp down below about when I actually start answering questions, because I appreciate that when you're watching this on a replay, all this tech stuff can be a bit dull. Anne's question, I'm going to read it out because I really like that question. I actually find it much more comfortable answering questions about myself than trying to answer questions for other people. So Anne has asked, do I have a ritual or method for clearing your mind before you talk to clients? Yes, I do, Anne. Something that I like to do is I get out my notepad and I write down like intentions, and I write may I, and then I finish that sentence. So it would be something like, may I be patient and kind. May I be humble and listen. And it's just all these reminders for myself. Because somebody commented on one of my videos and they called me enlightened, and God bless you, but I don't relate to considering myself an enlightened person. It takes work for me to center myself. And I think when you see me on YouTube or you see me doing this work that I do, I sometimes think you're probably getting the best version of me. Anyway. Hi, Sarah. What would you say to someone who chews a lot of gum all day? Do not overeat or binge. What would I say to them? I wouldn't say anything unless they're asking me a question about it. So I guess the question is, what's the question? Anne, I don't know, because I think you're watching live now. But clearly, if you're putting this in a comment, you're seeing it as a problem. And I don't know if you're seeing it as a problem in someone else or you're seeing it as a problem in yourself. So what is the question you're actually asking? Because you're asking me, what would I say to somebody? I'm not going to say anything to anybody unless they're specifically asking a question to me about it. I don't know if that makes sense. Because unsolicited advice is the worst. So sometimes when people ask me questions on social media, it's so broad, it's more like a statement. People will often put comments on my videos and their statements, and it's like there's a question in there. But I often find that the hardest to respond to because I don't really know what that person is wanting. So if you comment on my videos and you are like hoping that I can respond and offer you something, please like word it as a specific question, and it's much easier for me to respond. So from, I'm sorry, I don't know, Alia, hi, you've changed my life. Thanks so much. I still haven't been able to finish your YouTube audiobook, and I've already started listening to my body. No binging 3 days straight seemed impossible. Oh, thank you. I thought it was going to be a question. I didn't mean to just read out compliments to myself, but I'm really glad to hear that. another question that came in, this was a question on my channel, and I did reply to it on the channel, but I wanted to mention it here because it's not something I think I've spoken about before. And the question was, what are your thoughts on the similarities or differences between weekend large cheat meals and binging? There's a lot of talk, particularly in the fitness world, about cheat days. And so perhaps you're being quote unquote good, or AKA restrictive and controlled during the week, and then you loosen that control at the weekend. Ultimately, the question is this distressing to you? Is this a problem? I am not here to moralize how people should eat and say, no, the ideal way to eat is to eat freely all the time. The question is this a problem for you? And I was guessing that if the person was putting this as a question, then maybe it was because they're struggling with something. So then it's about compulsion and it's about distress and it's about feeling out of control. So you can look at that as you would any other kind of binging behavior, but you don't have to. If you're doing this and this feels okay for you, like crack on, you do you. Um, Question. I find myself drinking loads throughout the day to avoid a binge, but I think there's a typo there, but something becoming too much. I have so much fear of a binge because it makes me so depressed after. Any advice for me? One of the I get it. First thing I want to say is I get it. If you struggle with compulsive eating and you're somebody who can eat large amounts of food in one go and that's you feel out of control and you hate that, of course, you're going to look for ways to not do that. And the thing is with the way our hormonal daily circadian cycles work is that for many people it's easier to eat less during the day. This is not everybody, but for the majority of people, we're less hungry in the morning and our appetite tends to build up throughout the day. And so the problem is then by trying to work with that, you've already got the natural increase of appetite that can happen throughout the day. And then when you don't eat enough, you drive that up even harder. So I'll often hear it as, oh, but I'm really good throughout the day, but then in the evening I have my meal and I'm not hungry anymore and I keep eating. The problem is you can be full of food and still be hungry. You can be full of food and still want to eat. I'm guessing if you watch my content, you're already aware of that. So the problem is you get to the end of the day, even if you have a substantial meal and you still want to eat, you think that you've got something wrong somehow because you want to eat and you're not hungry. But when you don't eat enough throughout the day, you dial down those satiety, those satiation hormones. So then it is harder to feel satisfied later in the day. We know that ghrelin, the hunger hormone that's produced by the stomach, goes like this throughout the day. It goes up in this kind of steady incline, and around 7 p.m. we get a spike. So if you eat less throughout the day, that goes up more sharply, and then you get a bigger spike. So you end up with these bigger binges in the evening. So this is not me saying, right, from this moment onwards, what you need to do is eat more throughout the day. What this shows us, though, is the potential benefits of eating more during the day. But you are your own experiment. So test this out for yourself because the black and white all or nothing thinking will panic because it doesn't want to do this because it feels like it's going to end up eating even more overall. And there's a kind of paradox with this sometimes. Sometimes it's like you deliberately eat more and then you end up eating less overall. But you need to test that out for you because binge eating is complex and there might be other things going on for you around your binge eating. So if it feels safe enough for you to do this, you could think, okay, well, maybe for a week, I'm going to eat more throughout the day. For a week, I am going to, they call it sometimes front loading your day. I'm going to have like my bigger meal earlier on in the day and just see what happens because you're not going to continue it anyway unless you experience some benefits. So it's that willingness to be playful and experiment and see if it's helpful. Hi, Sarah. I noticed that I now subconsciously worry overeating anything that is unhealthy, and that mindset often causes me to binge. Can I get some advice on how to stop overthinking when eating? So, a lot of people will talk about mindful eating in recovery and about being much more present with your food. And this can be helpful, but I think a lot of the way mindful eating is practiced is quite all or nothing. And if you've got a mind that is vulnerable to overthinking, it just gives it space to get really loud. So for some people, it can feel absolutely unbearable. So I think that one thing that can be helpful with eating foods that you might think of as unhealthy is one, planning them in advance. And when I say in advance, I mean the day before, not even on the day. Saying to yourself, okay, tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to have this treat food and I'm going to have it at this time. That helps in as much as it stops it being a compulsive choice. And ultimately, what we're trying to shift here is the compulsivity around choices. But the problem is when people judge their choices a lot, they end up creating more compulsion around their choices because they end up in a bit of a battle with themselves. So that's one thing, is to plan it in advance, because you need to give yourself a bucket load of reassurance when you're doing this, because your mind is going to panic and you're going to feel guilty and stressed and all of those feelings. So you need to be reassuring yourself and showing up for yourself. You might even write something down for you to read to kind of refute some of the thoughts that you know that are going to come up. And recognizing that those judgmental thoughts that come up is very much your conditioning. And what we're trying to do is introduce a new way of thinking. For some people, actually having some distraction when they eat is helpful. It's not about whether you distract or you don't distract, it's why and is that serving you? So if you find that you are overthinking a lot, you may deliberately choose to eat something while watching something on television, or even eat something while listening to a podcast or watching one of my videos or something like that, so that you don't feel quite so alone in it. So that's a couple of ways to help it. And it's like, when you know that you're going to overthink and when you know what your mind is going to say, you almost get out ahead of it. So you're waiting, you're like, okay, well, tomorrow afternoon I'm going to eat this thing. And I know my mind is going to get very loud. And I know it's going to say this, I know it's going to say that. And you're waiting for it. Because when the thoughts come to us more unexpected, they tend to hook us in, right? We identify with them. And we think that we're thinking these things because we're just realizing something that's already true, as opposed to this is conditioned thinking being triggered off. So I think there's a couple of ways, couple of things for you to think about there, which might be helpful. Sarah or Sarah said, do you have any advice about how to deal with a relapse? It's so distressing and soul crushing, and I don't know how to get out of it. Sarah or Sarah, I have a whole video called How to Get Out of a Binge Eating Relapse. It was in the last 6 months, and it's got like a pink thumbnail. What I might do is I might make a note of let me find a pen around here. I'll make a note of any of my videos that I mention. And then after this video is finished, I can pop all the links to them for that. So the relapse one. But it's also recognizing, I guess one thing I'd say about that now is that relapses, you might have heard this before, relapses are a part of recovery. And it's really true, because you will know that you are secure in your recovery, not when you just never relapse, but when you know that if or when you relapse, you know how to bring yourself back. That to me is a sign of very stable recovery. That to me, I think, was at the point where I started using the word recovered for myself, because I didn't for the longest time, because I almost felt like I was tempting fate if I called myself recovered, because what if I have a relapse at some point? But I trust that I can bring myself back before it even turns into a relapse, like a full-blown relapse, if you see what I mean. You sometimes say binge eating, I think that's disorder, is depending on, I don't know what that says. I'm working with a psychotherapist, but should it be easier, be free from binge eating? Sorry, I can't, there's, I don't think that message is complete. I work with my trauma at the same time. Okay, so I sometimes say binge eating disorder, I don't know, is dependent on trauma or isn't dependent on trauma. I'm not sure. But when it comes to something like binge eating and trauma, for some people, trauma is a big part of why they develop binge eating. And for other people, trauma, as we think about it, not necessarily, but if you develop binge eating as a result of dieting or restriction, that is a type of trauma. Like the body reads that, and the mind and the nervous system reads that as a type of trauma. And I guess I don't even know so much whether it's we resolve our trauma, because the whole point of trauma is it leaves a mark on us, right? It's scarred. It's like an injury that we carry around. So for many of us, it's about how do we find safety when our trauma is triggered? How do we come back to the here and now? And then for some people, it might be a case of that you create enough safety for yourself in the here and now that you don't really get triggered by your past trauma as well. Um, but a lot of that, I think, it comes back to like all the stuff that I bang on about around self-compassion, developing an allied voice. We have to make this place here a safe, calmer place to reside. And that comes from self-trust and not even we often think like we want to be able to trust ourselves in our behavior. Like we want to be able to trust that we're not going to binge. But I think before any of the trust comes around the behavior, part of the problem is people are just focusing on the behavior. We need to trust that we will emotionally and mentally be able to show up for ourselves and make ourselves feel safe. And that has then a knock-on effect to our behavior because our behavior is a reflection of what we're thinking and feeling. So if we go into what we're thinking and feeling, our behavior shifts from that perspective. That's kind of the approach that I tend to take. So I think Anne's come back with her chewing gum question. I found that I chew a lot of gum, and although it helps me eat less, I think it doesn't help me learn another way to relax than having something in my mouth. I would have a look at other somatic exercises, this idea of finding a way to calm your body. And also having a think like, at what point do you think the chewing the gum is unhelpful? Is this something that you feel like is almost like an addictive behavior to you and it's something you feel like you need to get rid of? Or is it something you feel like you need to reduce? Because it could be in certain situations where it's not possible to do other kind of work to calm yourself down, chewing gum might feel like the thing to be able to calm yourself down. But I think you were saying as well, like this idea of using it to not eat. Did you mention that before? Like chewing a lot of gum as a way of trying to avoid overeating, is to really make sure that you are eating enough and eating to the point of feeling satisfied. I don't know if you're a grazer or if you're somebody who eats small meals, but I think if you are then trying to use other things to calm your nervous system down, one thing that really does calm our nervous system down is to be full as long as we are not beating ourselves up about it, because that puts us into this rest and digest state. This is one of the reasons why people end up with a tricky relationship with food, because they end up reaching for the food to try to keep creating that state. So when you're talking about trying to find another way to relax, I would look up somatic exercises. There's loads of them on YouTube, but it's about finding a way to create calmness in your nervous system. That's the goal. Now, everyone's nervous system is very different, so certain things will be more calming to other things. So, but that's an area of exploration that I would point you towards. Do you have a strategy or thoughts about having fear that my partner won't find me attractive in a larger body? I have spoken with him about it, but my fear is coming from inside me, not from him. Okay. So it sounds like the fact that you've been able to talk to him about it, that you have a pretty reasonable level of communication in your relationship. So it's one of those things that can be almost like a bit like jealousy, right? You might think in your calm state that there's nothing to be jealous of, but when jealousy is activated, it can take you over. So I'm guessing it could be a similar pattern played out here. He'll reassure you and you might be able to feel calm about it sometimes, but it keeps popping up for you. It keeps popping up for you. So I think there is a way to communicate this to him when it does without like burdening him or like putting it on him to try to keep feeling like he's then needing to make you feel better, and then you feel guilty about that and you end up in a cycle. And it's using this phrase. It's basically saying to your partner, I have something that keeps coming up for me at the moment and I just need to clear it with you. And it's using this phrase, I want to clear it with you. And then hopefully he agrees and like, yeah, go ahead. It's like all that stuff that keeps popping up, it's just coming up again. And I need whatever it is that you need from your partner. It's like, I just need a couple of reassuring words, or I just need a hug, or I just need something. It's one of those things that there is so much more to attraction than the size of someone's body. And how would you feel if your partner gained weight? So I think there is a place for some cognitive rationalizations to try to help yourself feel calmer and to name it, but telling him exactly what you need so then he can do it. And then when he does it, you thank him for doing it, and he gets to feel good that he's being a good partner and he's helped. I think partners get worn down or frustrated by it when you're saying it to them over and over again, and they're trying to find new ways to reassure you. They don't know what to do. They want you to feel better. They're then feeling bad about it. That's the situation that I'm sure you don't want and your partner doesn't want either. So it's having a think about, what do you need in that moment? And when you're coming to them, you're saying, I've got something coming up for me. Can I clear it with you? So you're not, in the way that you're speaking to them, constantly projecting it onto them, and then they're trying to take responsibility for giving it back to you at the same time as trying to make you feel better, if that makes sense. This year, I started having binge eating episodes in May 2023. I haven't had any before, and I've had anorexia and bulimia as well as counting calories for years. In August, I got my period back after 7 years. However, I felt so bad about having lost control that I tried restricting every time and always went back to the same cycle, gaining more weight. Now I'm getting better and eating more. That's great, Camilla. It can be really tough, I think, when you come from a restrictive eating disorder background, because your behavior can switch into binge eating, but your mind is still in a restrictive eating disorder place. And to that split between your behavior and the way that your mind is thinking about food is incredibly, incredibly painful. So I'm glad that you are getting better at the moment. Question here. I feel like binge urges decrease heavily in social situations and are almost gone when I'm out. And the same goes the first few minutes home. How can I just lost you. How can I manage the urges appearing once home? It feels like it really only ever starts after I'm home for a few minutes. This is like a transitional eating thing. And I really relate to this one, Layla. This used to happen to me quite a bit. So I'm somebody who, I like people. I like hanging around with people. And sometimes I would get home, and that transition from being with people and being in the energy of people to then suddenly being at home, just something came up to me, and I don't even have a proper word for what that feeling is even now. But it was like this trying to shift to something, and in that moment I just wanted to eat something. I think when you're coming home and you're walking in the door, is that, again, this idea of getting out ahead of something. So first of all, just making sure that you're not restricting around others. Like, are you eating what you want? Do you feel restricted? Any of that? It may be that that's not the case. It wasn't the case for me. I didn't feel restricted around other people. I just felt very regulated around other people. So when you're coming in, you're waiting for that feeling. So it's almost like your body is coming in your front door and your mind is on the other side of the door, waiting for that feeling to hit. It's a very different emotional experience when we're like this, like waiting for a feeling that we know is coming. It puts us in this place of the observer, and the feeling's going to come, and then talk to yourself. This is going to sound strange, but talk to yourself through it. Start trying to verbalize exactly what it is that you are feeling, because there's something going on here that is struggling to be processed, that maybe you didn't. If I might be projecting here, because I'm kind of coming at it from how it felt for me, just because I resonated with what you're saying. But this was really helpful to just start talking to myself about going like, okay, I've just got home and straight away I want to eat something. Like straight away I'm having these uncomfortable feelings. What's going on in my body? It's something about when a feeling is very predictable in a situation, it's like, are we willing to go into that feeling? And it's not like, right, I have to go into the feeling because I mustn't eat anything. It's like, let me just go in and try and process whatever this thing is, and then see what happens to the urge or how you're feeling. I think Camilla, who was talking before, has like finished her question, got sandwiched between two comments. So Camilla was saying, I haven't had an episode for 2 weeks. What's hard for me is to know how much I need to eat. I don't know what it means to be satiated in a reasonable way. No, and I appreciate that there's a lot of challenges around doing that. I think if you are somebody who comes from a restrictive eating background and you really are feeling extremely out of touch, like you don't have a sense of when you're satisfied or how much food or any of this, that's the time, if you can, to work with a dietitian or a nutritionist, maybe someone with intuitive eating, if you're someone who feels like that outside of contact. If not, like, and you can do some of this stuff on your own, then Camilla, I would highly recommend getting the intuitive eating workbook because it has exercises and worksheets for you to specifically do to try to like make these connections match up again so that you can, in your words, feel more satiated. Um, you say it in a reasonable way. I might just, invite you to use the word regulated because the word reasonable suggests that it has to cognitively make sense. And when we're using our cognitive mind to decide exactly what is the appropriate amount of food that we should be eating, that's often what keeps leading us down the disordered eating path. Okay. What is your perspective about using binge eating as a not so good grounding tool for people who experience dissociation? Well, firstly, it is a really good grounding tool. Like, I appreciate that. I know what you're saying because I appreciate there's like a knock on effect to that. But binge eating or even filling yourself up with food has this unique ability to allow you to completely check out of the moment or bring you into the moment. And what often happens with people that are experiencing dissociation, because it's about trauma, it comes back to this idea of safety. It's about making the body a safe place to be. And that, for some people, comes back to somatic work when talking isn't enough, when, you know, identifying your thoughts and challenging them and trying to develop a kind of voice when all of this stuff feels like way out of reach for you because you just don't feel safe within you. I would have a look into somatic work. Um, I'm currently trying to address my relationship with alcohol and worried this will result in increased overeating as I use both food and alcohol for the same reason, to numb sadness and loneliness. Um, I'm pretty sure I have some videos on this. I'm just gonna make a note of this for numbing. I must have something on numbing, I would have thought. Um, Sometimes I work with people sometimes who their relationship with alcohol and food feels very intertwined. And so for some people, actually, when they do the work with alcohol and how they use alcohol, when I say do the work, they're not just stopping alcohol, they're doing the work around their relationship with alcohol. That's potentially going to really nicely complement because it's kind of the same work that they might need to do around food. However, if they just decide to stop drinking, sometimes food then moves in more to kind of take their place as such, something like that. So I'm not quite sure um, which one of those is most relatable for you. So there is, again, like there isn't a specific question in there, but I also like I've got one that's like using food to cope is the name of the video. It's got like a grey background. Again, I'll put the link in there. I think that might have some helpful stuff in there for you to have a think about, when you're talking about to numb the sadness and loneliness. I talk about that in that video there. Okay. I'm sorry, they keep bouncing about a little bit. I've always felt I could control myself and bounce back when I feel it's been getting so bad. But I lost this all of a sudden. Is it due to trauma going undiscussed? Um, so if you're talking about how controlling food becomes harder over time, that is so common. For many people, the first few times that they try to diet, it's fairly easy. But each time that you go into that over control place, your brain and your nervous system, they code that as a threatening experience. It is a threat to survival. That's how it is experienced in the body. So, what you are describing is something that I see with many, many people, probably the majority of people who struggle with this, find that over time, they just can't control food anymore. Like, I used to be able to do it and I just can't. And then they struggle even harder because they know in the past they've been able to do it. So they think, well, I should just be able to do it again. So no, I don't think it's necessarily trauma going undiscussed. That could be going on in your life, but what you're describing is a very normal biological response to trying to control food over a period of time. I'm having difficulty socializing with friends because I feel like I might binge. Any tips? Also, any tips on how to handle trigger foods? So when you say socializing with friends, are you talking about binging with your friends? I'm assuming that this is how I read it, and apologies if I'm not got this accurate. That sometimes when you're with people, you might eat foods that you wouldn't otherwise eat, and then you feel guilty about that, and you have "I've blown it" thinking. So you feel like you've just messed up. So you just hit the F it button because you're like, well, I've already eaten all these foods, so I'm just gonna with my friends, which I didn't want to do, so I'm just gonna go home and carry on eating. Um, so that I guess is something that I would say with that, because most people aren't binging with people. Um, but it's watching that all or nothing. So I think there's a lot to do with neutralizing food and moving away from this idea that I have blown it somehow. So looking into like black and white thinking, catastrophic thinking, I've got a few videos on those, might be a good place to start. Um, any tips on how to handle trigger foods? That we have, because that's such a broad question, I will pop a couple of links because we've done a couple of podcast episodes that I think would cover that quite well. I'm going to just do a couple of questions that were pre-submitted because I did ask on Instagram for people to put their questions forward, and I want to offer that. So someone put, in recovery and doing well, I feel ready to become vegan for ethical reasons, but every time I try, I binge. The thing is with something like becoming vegan is it is a type of food restriction. And for some people, that may not be a problem at all. The fact that you are binging when you try to do this suggests that there is a part of you that is experiencing it like a restriction. And that part could be very different to the part of you that might hold these strong ethical beliefs about veganism. So, my suggestion here, because you're saying that you're somebody who is in recovery and doing well, so there's been some stability around food, is rather than making this black and white one off decision to go vegan, can you do a slower transition and just notice if or when the binging comes? So rather than saying like, right, today I'm going to be back on the vegan wagon and that's what I'm going to do, saying to yourself, okay, like, well, this week I am going to, I don't know, have a day where I only eat vegan foods and just see how that goes, doing it one day a week. There's all this flexitarian stuff here as well, but trying to move away, because what's happening here is there's some black and white thinking that's going on. So whichever the part of you is that's panicking needs to be eased in and reassured. It might be that anytime you go full vegan that you do binge, and it may just be that for whatever reason it's not possible. But I think you can try just by not approaching it in a black and white all or nothing way and just trying to shift a little bit at a time. Okay. So someone's put, I've got a Vivance, I kind of never how to say it, Vivance prescription to help with binge eating disorder and bulimia. Excited thoughts. So for anyone who doesn't know, it's an amphetamine that is often used to, well, it was originally designed for ADHD. And they also noticed that it has an appetite suppressing effect. So it's sometimes used to treat binge eating and bulimia. So my thoughts on things like medications is I am open to anything that might help someone. I don't know that everybody needs a therapeutic psychological approach. I think that with many medications, there's often like a cost to them, not just a financial cost, but there's a cost sometimes to trying to artificially adjust something. And also, if the psychology and the emotional stuff hasn't been looked at all, tends to be a bit less effective, because something like this particular medication is it reduces appetite throughout the day, but it wears off by the evening. So if by having a lower appetite throughout the day, you jump on that and you're like, right, I am going to like really eat as little as I can because I don't even feel like eating, you're likely going to end up with backlashes when the medication wears off. So even when you don't feel like eating, there is a case to be made that it's quite important to continue eating substantial meals. And let me know how you get on. Some people do it and they find that it doesn't help at all and they find it problematic. Some people say it does help a bit. So yeah, it can be pretty varied. But if your binge eating is a reaction to restriction, like this is one of the worst things you can do. And I think those are the people for whom it makes it a lot worse. But that's just not the case for everybody who struggles with binging. Um, I'm a university student, and during the final exams period, I was so stressed and tired. As a result, I found myself eating constantly. Next time, what should I do? Thank you. So, you talk about being so tired and stressed. When you are tired, what you need to do is rest. And I know that feels like that's an impossible thing to do when you are in the final exams period. But then it's just about trying to improve the quality of your rest. This is just basic self care stuff, trying to look after yourself in all these other ways as much as you possibly can. What often happens when people are stressed is one, your blood sugar is going to be all over the place. That happens when we get stressed, which means we tend to crave often like more like quick release carbohydrate type foods. That is just a natural biological thing that happens in our bodies. So ensuring that you are eating substantial meals, that you are having plenty of fiber to help balance out the sugar effect of that. The worst thing you can do is try to cut back on your eating at a time when you are stressed and tired, because you're going to end up with a rebound of that. Maybe if you even plan to eat a bit more, but you plan it in so it doesn't feel like there's just this compulsive reaching and reaching. Finding ways to make the study experience just a bit better, a bit more tolerable. So one of the things that I did when I was writing my dissertation for my psychotherapy degree was I used to take myself out and I would sit in a it's not exactly the height of class, but I'd sit in a Weatherspoons pub. For those of you in the UK, you know what I'm talking about. And their coffee would be like £1.50 for unlimited coffee. And their food was really cheap. And they actually have some of them in really beautiful buildings with comfortable seats. And so I would take myself places to work, places where I just felt a little bit looked after. I couldn't have done it if I just shut myself away in my room. I think a bit like you, I would have just been going stir crazy. And like, what are you then doing to try to reward yourself? You end up reaching for food. But also, it's like this is a short period of time. So it's a case of like you are powering through something as well. And so food is going to have a place in that. So there's something about like you may end up eating more. And if you try to eat less, you'll end up with a backlash on that. But I appreciate what you're saying about trying to balance it out a bit potentially. Oh, Andy, how do you feel about all the people you have helped in so different places as a YouTuber and podcaster? How do I feel about the people? I feel great. And it's also just slightly surreal and weird because I'm just sitting, I was going to say sitting in my home or sitting wherever I am at that particular time talking to my camera. So I really appreciate the comments. And when people often message me separately, because I appreciate you may not want to leave a public comment on YouTube when you're struggling with something like this. But to me, it's just kind of crazy because I went to New York this year, so met some of our American listeners of the podcast, and done a couple of events in London. And next year, we're going to be doing, this is Steph, who I do the podcast with. We're going to be doing an evening in Brighton with the Strong Not Starving podcast, which is Marcus Kane. If you've not checked out Strong Not Starving, I highly recommend it. He's a personal trainer, but he's recovered from his own eating disorders. So especially if you're somebody who wants to like have a bit of a lens to the fitness side of things too, I think he does it in a really healthy and nuanced way. And so we're going to be doing something in Brighton in May, and we're also going to be doing something in Bournemouth. Both of those are in the UK. Don't know if we're going to make it overseas next year. I would love to, but it's Steph you've got to pester because she has 3 children and can't just drop everything. So if you want us to come to your country, message Steph, for those of you who know her, because I'll be there in a heartbeat. I have a similar feeling. I binge when alone, but when I'm around people, I'm fine. The transition from being around to being alone triggers me to binge. Yeah, it just is. I need to have a think about how to actually talk about this because I don't have the language to me that describes it in a way that is satisfyingly accurate. I live with my mum and I tend to binge and order food when my mum is outside. I know it's because of her judgment. I don't know how to deal with this problem. By the way, I order when she's at home also. This is such a tricky one because when you have other people around and then when those people are around, whether it's partner, family, friends, or whoever it is, but when they're around, you don't feel free to eat what you want. It's like it's experienced as like a type of restriction. because you end up with these little windows of opportunity, like they've gone out, or you finally have some time to yourself, or you go out and you have this little window of opportunity to have something. So you're like, oh, I feel like I have to have it now because she's going to be home soon. So it means that sometimes you're eating in these windows of opportunity where if the window is wide open all the time, you wouldn't need to do, you wouldn't feel the need to do that in quite the same way. So I think there's something around um, often, and it's tough. I appreciate that. It's really easy for me to sit here and say this, but eating more around those kinds of people and even having conversations with them. Steph, she wrote an email to her family. She's posted it on her Instagram as well, not that long ago. She posted the template because I think it came from the Caroline Dooner's The Fuck It Diet book. And it's a template where it just explains to them like what you're doing. You're trying to do this, do it a different way. It may mean that you're eating more food. It may mean that you're eating different kinds of foods, but without being able to communicate with the people that are around you, this becomes harder and harder. So, like with these kinds of relationships, it's about really improving that communication. There was a question here actually that was pre-submitted where someone says they've binge eating disorder for 25 years, up and down 80 pounds every 4 years. How to explain to close people and educate. So I think, first of all, can we all just agree that there is something really absurd in a funny kind of way about binge eating? That you end up with, you're doing this behavior and it's causing you so much pain and you don't want to be doing it, yet it doesn't feel possible to stop. Yet it feels like it should be just possible to stop, but it doesn't feel like it. And it's like, it doesn't seem to make rational sense. So I think whenever you are trying to help somebody to understand about this, I think the first thing is acknowledging that they're not going to be able to understand and acknowledging that explicitly to them. To even say, like, I don't think that you'll be able to understand this because I wouldn't understand it if I hadn't experienced it. Because I think that's probably true for most of us. If you hadn't experienced this, how could you understand somebody else explaining this behavior that doesn't seem to make sense but has taken over their whole life, right? That lets them off the hook a little bit because they don't have to try and make out that they understand. They don't have to try and rationalize you out of it because you're saying, I know that this is not seemingly rational, but my brain seems to do some different things around food. My brain has the capacity to override my conscious control because binging is often coming from a very primal part of the brain that's being triggered in some way, whether that's through trauma, restriction, emotion, whatever it is, but it's a primal part of the brain. It's a primal drive. So that's some of the ways that I try to explain it to people when I'm talking about what I do and when I'm talking about the difference between binge eating or somebody who just feels like they're eating more than they would otherwise. And I think when they see that you understand as well, like that this isn't rational and that you're understanding that they don't understand, the irony is then they understand a little bit. It's a strange one. It's like you try and understand them first, putting yourself in their shoes, and then they'll be able to hear you better as well. Usually, obviously, we can't speak for everyone. Um, Alison. Hi, Alison. I find myself hoarding food and saving so much for myself during gatherings. I have also I have thoughts of not wanting to share food with others. Is this still part of my eating disorder? This is like a fear of restriction, of not being able to have enough. It's a scarcity thing. And so when you've had an eating disorder, your brain, your nervous system, your body knows what food scarcity feels like, even if it was self imposed. So, what that can do is it makes yourself much more hyper aware of any perception of food scarcity. So, even something like sharing can feel like, but if I share with someone, am I going to get enough? Is there going to be enough food? So, I would put that under the label of scarcity as opposed to specifically necessarily eating disorder behavior, but potentially triggered or exacerbated by having an eating disorder. I think, and Alison's asked if there's something I can do about this. It's recognizing in the moment, oh, I am frightened that I'm not going to get enough food. I'm frightened that food is scarce. That's what's going on for me. And when you name it in the moment, then you can speak to yourself about that. So that involves being really kind and reassuring yourself that food is plentiful, reassuring yourself that you can go back and have some food. But when food doesn't feel plentiful, this kind of behavior will keep being triggered once it starts. My trigger is sweets. They're always a reason to calm down or get out. Do you advise that I never eat them at all? Tamara, are you new to my channel? Um, no, I don't encourage people to cut out foods. But if people come to me and they say I've cut out foods because that's what I feel like I need to do and I feel better, then that's absolutely fine. I don't have a problem with people cutting out foods if that's the way they want to go and they feel like that helps them. But I don't advise that at all. So they said there's always a reason to calm down or get out. I'm not quite sure what you mean by get out. So again, it's finding other ways to calm down. It's recognizing why you're not calm in the first place. Like, what is it you're believing in the moment? What is triggering this disturbance in you? And that's the part. It's about working on calming yourself down so that sweets don't have to be the way to do that. When you can calm yourself down, usually by how you talk to yourself, by recognizing what's going on. Because a lot of the time we're activated because there's usually fear about something. There's an emotional something going on. Self judgment is a big one. Like a lot of the time, if we're not judging ourselves, we can just meet our emotions with, I was going to say ease, so much more ease. It's not ease that's quite the same thing, but the fear. That's what I found actually, that the fear, when I'm not judging myself so much, the fear of my emotions reduces. And that's what I hope other people can experience. How do I reset my appetite to be regular and avoid kicking in all of a sudden in the evening after fasting all day? I would suggest not fasting all day. Dorothy, hi Sarah, I had anorexia bulimia for 15 years and have recovered. I've worked so hard to get here, but lately I've been tempted to restrict my food and lose weight. Any advice about avoiding relapse? What I found, Dorothy, because I would get into a place where I would feel okay, and then I would be like, just gonna cut back a little bit. I would try and tweak my choices a bit here and a bit there with a mindset of like, well, maybe I could try and lose a bit of weight. And the minute I did that, my eating got compulsive. So that for me, like it was like immediate feedback, if you see what I mean. So I guess when you're talking about this, like when you've talked about anorexia and bulimia, though, that's slightly different because the danger is with going near restriction is that you allow the anorexic voice to come in and take over again. That's the problem. So it's like, what is it that you are hoping restricting your food is going to give you? And if you say, well, I hope it's going to give me weight loss. Well, what are you hoping that weight loss is going to give you? Like, what is this feeling that you want, that you would imagine, and your mind is telling you if you just restrict, you just lose a bit of weight, then you'll get it? Like, what is that? So sometimes it can be triggered for people when they're feeling a bit out of control in their lives. So it's like, oh, it would just be great to be able to restrict a little bit and lose a bit of weight and just feel like I'm doing something for myself that for years my mind has told me is what I need to be doing. So when you talk about advice about avoiding relapse, I would be looking at why now? Like, why now is this impulse in me to restrict food and lose weight? Is there something that I'm not paying attention to in my emotional experience that I could be looking at, as opposed to trying to solve an experience through messing about with my eating, which is like a little bit like playing with fire when you've had a real restrictive eating disorder. Um, so Happy New Year, troops. Question: struggling to stop the binging again at the moment. Been waking up at silly hours like 3 a.m. with strong urges, and find it harder to reason out of the urges this early. At 3 a.m. because we all have the similar circadian cycle, even shift workers. 3 a.m. is when we get our cortisol spike. So at 3 a.m. the adrenals release cortisol into the body. And it's all part of like the sleep cycle and allows us to wake up in the morning, and our cortisol levels rise. Without it, it would feel almost impossible to wake up in the morning. So it's often a stress response. So this waking up, like you're talking about the strong urges that come with that, could be a response to like cortisol. So I guess my question would be is like, what's going on during the day? Can you find a way to fall asleep in a more peaceful state? I really like Yoga Nidra, and there's one by Lizzie Hill that's super popular. It's millions and millions of views. I like it because it's like 20 minutes long. Some of the others I think are just a bit too long. And finding ways to really relax and calm your body so that you can get into a deeper, more peaceful sleep. Because this sounds more like a sleep problem. And if you wake up at 3 a.m. and you're half asleep, any of the stuff we might talk about, like, oh, checking in with yourself or what's going on or any of that, like your brain is just not even there. You're not even fully online. So I would be looking at this as a sleep thing about how to sleep through the night as opposed to how to um, manage binge urges at 3 a.m. It is nearly 6 o'clock, folks. I am going to have to love you and leave you. Um, there's one, just quickly, one about celiac. Um, I've got one about, I can't remember what it's called, one about food intolerances that's worth having a look at. Allergies are a little bit more tricky to handle, especially something like celiac, where you don't necessarily get the immediate feedback to that. But I would look at the food intolerance ones because I think there's a bit of a message in there that might be helpful. Um, who was the yoga? Oh, it's Yoga Nidra. So it's not actually yoga. So it's a meditation. It's a guided meditation where you lie down and you're falling asleep. So it's like a relaxation meditation. So the channel is Lizzie Hill, and you'll see the one because, like I said, it's got millions and millions of views. And you just lie there and you listen to her talk you down and relaxing all the different parts of your body. It's just a really good one. So no, I'm not telling you that you've got to yoga before you go to bed, unless you feel inspired to. But anyway, well, everybody, thanks for joining me today. It's been great I've enjoyed doing this. I might try and do a few more lives. I did do one, I think it was about a year and a half ago, and that seemed to go quite well. So yeah, it's a little bit nerve-wracking going live as well, especially with blooming tech issues. But anyway, well, to all of you, I wish you a happy new year, and may 2024 be a year of peace and food freedom and recovery for you all. Take care. Bye bye.